Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Atlas and Axis podcast. We appreciate you joining us last week. I'm your co-host, Chad Smith. Here with me, as always, is the illustrious Dr. Aaron Cohen-Gadol. This week, we are talking about the art of failure and what failure can teach us in terms of humility, resilience, and the overall indomitable nature of the human spirit. So, Dr. Cohen, it's great to be back here with you again, having another great discussion about, just everything, your experience in neurosurgery, your experience as a biotechnology entrepreneur and innovator, and of course, any great, individual that we know of in any field, whether it's sports, engineering, law, medicine, they all have stories of, quote unquote, overnight success, but the question is, how do they get there? And I think the answer is, just like Thomas Edison, he didn't figure out one way to invent a light bulb. He figured out 10,000 ways to not make one. What are your kind of thoughts on, your initial experience with failure, especially with tough cases when you were a young neurosurgeon?
Yeah. Well, Chad, it's great to be with you again. I sincerely appreciate this great podcast. They've been tremendous. They've been amazing. I've learned a lot, to be honest, from your thoughts. And, I've done a lot of soul searching myself as we do these, just to see how we can make our viewers and listeners to really make this time worth it for them to listen to us. So I think that's extremely important to us, and I hope we have done that. So I also really appreciate this episode, which is about something that is critical for our growth, for our ability to become a better person. The failures often define who we are, and I think that's really important to talk about them more than our successes. So in neurosurgery, the stakes are extremely high, probably higher than any other profession, and therefore failures and their meanings are extremely exaggerated. How do we deal with a failure in brain surgery? And I think especially in brain surgery, this is an important topic because obviously there's a life at risk and there is a personality, the seat of the soul is at risk. And therefore, because this failure topic is so extremely sensitive in brain surgery, more than any other profession, absolutely, I think this discussion can really nicely apply to other areas of life. There's many opportunities come in life, and it's best to take advantage of those opportunities. But there are obviously chances for failure. And how do we deal with that failure? I think define who we are. I think my failures have defined who I am today, and more than my successes, because, all those successes and all those amazing surgeries that went well, I don't remember them. I barely remember them because, they're supposed to go well. Yeah. But when things don't go well and the patients unfortunately pay a price or unfortunately the ultimate price, how do we deal with that failure? How can you move forward next day? Those are, I think, what's critical. And that applies to, life in general. You may not, you may have something go bad in your family, with your child, with your work, and how you have the courage and resilience to go to the next level and to move forward and still look for a bright future and hope defines who we are today. As a surgeon, as a brain surgeon, what has defined me to be who I am has been those failures, because the ability to be resilient, and we're going to talk a lot about resilience today. And for me, resilience means to have a failure not to paralyze you, but have the ability to use this as an opportunity to get better and grow. That, I think, is the most important ingredient from a person to get better. So going back, I think life gives you opportunities, and at times you fail. And the failures define who I am in those surgeries. 7,500 surgeries, a couple of hundred of them have not gone well at all, despite my utmost effort. And then how do I come out of the operating room, talk to the family, and how do I learn to get better and move forward? I've had many colleagues of mine, extremely capable surgeons, that failures unfortunately defined them as who they are. And after a number of failures, they quit doing brain surgery and went ahead and continued doing surgeries in other parts of neurosurgery that were less risky. And one has to think, is that the right path forward based on your personality? But even, again, going back to the topic, is opportunities come along. We have to take advantage of them, no matter at times if the risk of failure can be significant, because the greatest things that we do come with the greatest risks of failure. We can always succeed in small things and shine, but those successes tend to be small and short-lived. If you want to do those big successes, the big successes are associated with high risk of failure and ability to deal with the failure at every step of the process. So the failures have defined me who I am to be here today and still do those high-risk surgeries and be able to benefit those patients who deserve it. And really use resilience as a tool to get to that step. There's no question the first step is to be able to own your failure, to say, you know what, be transparent about it, self-reflect about it. And I think self-reflection is another important word here. How do you self-reflect? What happened that we made a mistake? How can we learn from it? How can we be resilient? And the third item that is extremely important is mentorship. Collaboration with a colleague that you really can trust, a family member, to share the happiness and obviously share the failures and the emotions associated with it. And people who really believe in you are going to help you. People who have invested in you for you to succeed are going to be there for you to help you during these tough times. And again, the humility, self-reflection, resilience, mentorship, those are the elements that have really carried me along in extremely difficult times in my career.
Absolutely. And going back to that, Dr. Cohen, you spoke about colleagues that had previously had those moments that sort of shook them to their core, that made them step away from brain surgery. Do you have any examples of, kind of historically those cases for you that really made an impact on you that, you to this day still remember and, think about the lessons that you learned from them?
Yeah, that's such an extremely good important question. I remember I did a case, and I did everything I could during surgery to save a life. And the patient actually walked in the operating room in a relatively good condition. And during surgery, just like anything in life, how much do you push those skills and methods and maneuvers in surgery to remove the tumor and provide a good outcome for the patient versus taking risks during that tumor removal to provide a safe outcome for the patient? That can be a very fine line. It's just, very similar to driving a fighter jet or a racing car. How fast can you drive, or how much can you maneuver around the areas that can shoot you down and get to your target and still accomplish the tasks? But how much can you push your limits and stay safe?
And that harkens back to what we talked about last time that you had mentioned with safe confidence.
Exactly.
It's a very narrow window that you have to kind of stay in to be able to grow professionally at anything that you do, and be able to find that perfect boundary where you can keep everybody safe and yourself safe, but also push the limits of your field and your discipline.
I agree. How far the fine line of pushing the limits and accepting the risk of failure. High risk, high reward. Unfortunately, there's nothing like high reward, minimal risk. Those situations are extremely rare. So going back to the case of this patient with a brain tumor who we brought to the operating room, and we took 95% of the tumor and there was 5% left, and we said, okay, I just can take that 5%. It would make me so happy because I've done everything for the patient. For all the good intentions, I pushed the limits. I removed that additional 5%, even though I had questions how safe that is. And unfortunately, the patient suffered significant consequences. Going back, obviously, I self-reflected. I regretted it. And leaving the operating room, talked to the family. The surgery went well. We took the majority of the tumor out. Let's see how the patient wakes up. And the patient woke up with significant loss of function on one side of the body related to that 5% of the tumor that was removed.
Yeah.
Obviously, retrospectively, that was a very poor decision. One can say that, at the time that the patient woke up and we saw the results, it looked like an extremely bad decision. But going back at the time where things were going well and you really want to push the limits to provide that ultimate outcome, you can see that the perspective can be very different. And depending which perspective you're looking at, you can be extremely disappointed. But how to deal with that failure that all intended well, but really led to someone to have a severe consequence can be extremely difficult. The family, as a physician, we are so empowered to be able to do the right thing, and we should know everything and do the right thing. So what happens when a physician or a surgeon especially tries to do something that has a bad consequence? It can really affect their self-confidence. It can have really devastating results in terms of the next operation of a similar brain tumor. Would they leave a lot of tumor behind the next similar operation, and therefore make that patient also pay a price because they didn't get the treatment they deserve? So these are decisions that are very difficult, fine lines to walk, but one has to remember that at the time, for the case of that patient, for example, I have had mentors throughout my career that I was able to talk to show the films of surgery, the video of the surgery, and ask them, how bad of a decision was this? Not to try to rationalize that necessarily, I'm a good person and try to pat myself on the back, but rather see if this was a good decision and what could have been done differently. And having those mentors who really invest in you, who are very honest with you and not necessarily try to make you feel better, was the most important thing I could have done to learn what to do next time better.
Absolutely. And, in kind of touching on those points about, having a good relationship with a mentor who's been in your field for a long time, something that seems to kind of be a unifying theme across all disciplines, kind of harkens back to ancient Western traditions. We talk about Aristotelian ethics, one of the core tenets of which is to, criticize in private, praise in public. Can you talk a little bit about who some of those mentors were and those moments of, they covered for you but you really heard about it after?
Yeah. I think that's important, praise in public and criticize in private. We all have a certain level of pride and self-confidence that is so important for our success, that is so important for us to take the risks, push the boundaries, to be better every day. And that is important for us to maintain. You cannot, in my opinion, unless absolutely indicated in rare situations where errors were made that were intentional. Excluding those situations, I think most people, when they make an error or fall in these failure situations, they're unintended. And to be able to deal with that carefully and have mentors who still be able to keep your cruising altitude, but at the same time criticize you so you can remember and regret and then move forward rather than blame. I think there is two elements here that are critical, the difference between regretting and blaming. I think one has to regret about what happened, look for root causes, do better next time, and be strong that next time does not mean that one has to be too conservative and don't take any risk. Because certain risks must be taken for an extremely important outcome, such as brain surgery.
Absolutely.
And so really defining blame and regret. And also having those mentors who are there with you and know you well enough and you trust them so deeply that when they're criticizing you in private, you can really take that in the right way and know that they're with you in public within reason to support you and rationalize the decisions you made at the time, especially those ones that really made sense from that perspective at the time the decision was made.
Absolutely. And that's, in learning those lessons that, our mentors are kind enough to give us as part of our growth process. I think some of the, kind of going back to, a big part of this that we've been talking about, some of that having to do with resilience. There's been a lot of discourse over the last, especially 10 years or so, where the focus of, especially in medical education, we talk about resilience and grit and what those words mean. And, there's can be sometimes a generational gap between, people who were trained, back in previous times where that wasn't always the case. People were criticized in public and criticized in private. And part of that training was just getting through the slog and, kind of being pushed on to greatness, sort of a crucible effect. But these days we take a different approach and we talk about things like humility and resilience and what those kind of actionable steps can be. In your opinion, what do you see in the newer generation of surgeons that's, the opportunities that are better to learn resilience and grit compared to sort of the back in my day, sort of, how you experienced it coming through training?
Yeah, I think the new generation definitely look at failure differently. I think they take failure seriously. They understand that it's important, but I do believe at times they take less risk. And it's a generational mindset. It's a different generational perspective. I think the old schoolers, such as me, the options of a non-surgical treatment may have been less available at the time, and therefore we were empowered to take more risks through surgery to be able to do bigger things. And those times, these empowerment within reason led us to do sort of surgeries that were high risk, associated with bigger risk to the patient. But those opportunities also made us to become a better surgeon and better people. And I would say the current generation may not have those opportunities to take bigger risks because the environment, the political, geopolitical, let's say, changes that occur at every generation have made us to take less risk, to be more sensitive, and potentially be less able to deal with failure. And this lack of failure can potentially lead to issues with people reaching their, or lack of ability to deal with failure can lead to people not to reach their full potential.
You're absolutely right, Dr. Cohen. There's, especially for my generation, we grew up experiencing, not to harp on a trope of, participation trophies and things like that, but the culture of safety around medicine has changed so much and arguably for the better, especially over the last 20 or so years. But there's other things that can kind of affect that. What do you think are some more of those sort of core external factors that have affected the younger generations?
Yeah, I think, there's anything in life, any process in nature, human body, medicine, are opposing forces that lead to a moderation, to a process to occur. And those opposing forces are so critical for anything in nature to remain within a range of what we define normal.
Yeah.
And this normalcy has to be carefully considered, and these opposing forces have to be carefully balanced. I think maybe in my time or before my time, the safety factor and the empowerment of the surgeon was pushed more than it should have been. And the pendulum was, pushed to one side rather than the middle. And I think currently that the culture of safety is extremely important, and I'm very proud of it, in the current systems, but there are at times where their pendulum actually swings way to the other side, that the surgeon or the caretaker or the physician is so much underpowered or dispowered that the system safety elements take over the individual decisions. And this disempowerment and lack of power and ability to take certain risks to provide a better outcome could be compromised. And I think this is really important and a fine line. How much do we empower people to take risks, individual, to perform things that can affect masses versus maintaining a system safety culture and minimize the authority of those individuals to take risks, something we struggle with every day. And I think it's really important to reach a balance, not to swing the pendulum one way, as I think currently with certain generation has been that it's all about safety with minimal risk, because then we're going to compromise the care of certain patients, for example, in surgery, that if we had taken a little bit of risk, we would have been able to provide them with a much better outcome. And it's really the balance of taking risk. Certain patients may pay, but a much larger number of patients will benefit, and really be able to balance that the people who benefit are significantly more than those that unfortunately pay the price. Just like anything in life, I think those have to be carefully balanced for one to achieve consistent success. And again, consistent success is a relative term. Nobody's successful every time.
Right.
But one has to be successful most of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that the pendulum, I mean, that really nails it so much, especially, again, speaking from a more broad geopolitical, sociopolitical context over the last 40 years, we saw a swing in the mid 20th century towards, the kind of benefit of collective good, in the late 60s and early 70s especially. And then through the 80s and early 90s, we saw more focus on the individual. And it kind of has to be pointed out that every time we don't stifle individuals who are capable of innovation and making, positive change, there is that risk. But on the back end, we see huge benefits, things like the invention of the internet, people like Steve Jobs or Mark Andreessen or any of these innovators that, had an open culture of, individual responsibility and accountability that allowed them to have failures, allow them to flourish. Those are the things that I think now we are seeing kind of make a comeback again. But the trick is, again, kind of keeping that pendulum maybe in the middle, maybe swung just a little bit more towards the individual. And that's when we see the biggest growth as a society and innovation and technology and all the major disciplines. I think, that is really what it sort of boils down to, is how do we balance the ability for individuals to thrive versus our collective good.
Yeah, very well said. I think if there was an easy question, humanity would be in a better position. This is really a fine line, and personal accountability gets injected into that so clearly that a person who is personally accountable, who can understand what is just a fine line of how much risk is just enough, not too much, not too little, and having that sweet spot is not only just based on the person, the environment, the project, the state of life, the period of life you're at, the family you have, your financial stability. So many elements environmentally affect the degree of risk that you can tolerate. And so really taking this to the level of life of an individual, I think that's what our viewers are interested in. And I think it's really important to take certain risks. Without taking risks, success or those bigger successes are not possible. And opportunities come. Those big opportunities have big chance of failure, but you have to take the risk and be able to deal with them. You cannot say, well, I'll take the risks, but I'm not resilient to deal with the failures. Unfortunately, one comes with the other at all times.
Absolutely.
In fact, Chad, this brings me to a nice video, Instagram,
Oh, yeah.
I think, video by Tom Brady that discussed his opportunities and the games that he lost and how they define who he is and how he used resilience, courage, and his family to help him who he is today. So maybe we can roll that video. I think would be a nice addition.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and take a look right here, folks, and let us know what you think down in the comments.
Yeah, let's go ahead and roll the video. Thank you.
There will come opportunities in life, when they're presented to you, in front of you. It's just a matter of whether you're not prepared to take advantage of the opportunity. Right. But you got to develop that resilience within you. Life is not about how much you succeed. It's about what happens when you fail, right? So life is, you could look at like, man, what's been inspiring for me? If you said, oh, Tom, what are the greatest wins? I'd be like, the wins, those are, yeah. Let's talk about the losses. Those are the ones that really, made me who I am. And as you go through life, and we're all adults, things happen in life that you don't want to have happen. Whether you lose a game or whether things don't go well at work or something with your child, or, there's a lot of things that come up in our personal and professional lives that just don't go the way we want. And how do you deal with it? Do you deal with class and integrity and with courage and with resilience? And are you able to share emotion with people? And do you have other people in your life that can help you through those things? And I think, like I said, my blessing is I've had people that go through those things with me. And, they always say double the pleasure and divide the pain. And that's what relationships are all about. When you care for those people and when you love them and when you give to them, they give back. And, that's where the reward comes. Giving is for the giver and loving's for the lover and caring's for the carer. It's not for, for the other person all the time. It's for you too. So.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and it's so, we think of somebody like Tom Brady, TB12, the GOAT. He's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, an illustrious career, just about has more Super Bowl rings than fingers. But, like we talked about earlier with overnight success, you don't see, everybody knows those wins externally, yes, but nobody sees what somebody as great as Tom Brady goes through to get there. You see the Super Bowl rings, but you don't see those personal failures and struggles and strife. And that reminds me of some other famous stories of failure and success. Elon Musk, always a lightning rod kind of figure, but he is the wealthiest man in the world, and his story of how he got there is absolutely incredible for our listeners that might not be familiar with it. He was down to his last. He was a founder of PayPal in the early 90s, revolutionized payment processing on the internet. Apple Pay, things like that wouldn't be possible without their advancements. He was one of the founders and founding members of their team, and he was down to his last couple million and was nearly evicted because he had so much of that money tied up. He took that money and invested in Tesla and SpaceX, and now we have electric cars, and humans are going to be going back to the moon for the first time in almost more than 40 years soon, and we now have rockets that can be essentially caught with mechanical tongs. So, the mechanical chopsticks. It's just incredible. What are your thoughts on that, Doc?
Yeah, I think those are extremely eloquently mentioned, Chad. It's all about persistence. The key word is persistence. You can have those short successes and then you're going to hit a big failure and then you burn out and then you exit or get out. And that happens to many people. Actually, that happens to most people. Those big wins, just like how it came to Isaac Newton, for example, probably even more successful than Elon Musk in terms of what he did for humanity, is that he failed too many times and succeeded a few times. And his failures define who he was. And his successes, of course, define who he has been to all of us. So the ability to be able to deal with those tough times, be persistent, take the idea to the next level, just like Elon Musk did early on, really no money whatsoever, living in a tiny room, using internet from somebody downstairs, and having one bed, and his, I think, brother was coding at night and he was during the day, or vice versa, and taking showers in YMCA, and creating product first that really depended on him mostly. It was coding, didn't have need for much capital, and then create that initial wealth and use that to be able to apply to a much bigger project that really has transformed what we do today, and the cars and space exploration. Those are critical examples of how one navigates the challenges and uses the challenges as a method to succeed. So to be able to minimize your failures is all about planning. And again, this is another key word, is about planning. How do you plan to minimize and mitigate the effects of your failures? Because they're for sure going to come along.
Absolutely.
And the more you prepare well to deal with your failures that are not under your control, and many failures are not under our control, unfortunately, the more successful one can be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, especially, I think a big chunk of what we think of as resilience and grit is that recognition is, these are the things that I can control. These are the things that I cannot. And so, staying focused on that, let's say 30% or even as low as 20% of things that are well within our control, and being able to track them. Things like, like you had talked about before off camera, things like keeping a journal just daily. Great people throughout history were known, Teddy Roosevelt being a great example, Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, all these, great people of science, Marie Curie. They all kept, extensive personal records, and of course, a big influence on you, Harvey Cushing. Likewise, yes. Dr. Cushing was well known for, his archives that detailed every single thing that he tried and methods that he found that did and didn't work. And what can eventually emerge is a very clear picture of, how not to do something 10,000 times, like with Thomas Edison. But sometimes, like you said, all you need is one or two or a few. And that is what will create success. And that's something that, again, in our modern age of social media and influencers, people's public, diary, Instagram or TikTok or take your pick, all they show are their successes. It's very rare that people are willing to be vulnerable enough to show their failures. And I think that is kind of the implicit part that we don't, as a society, talk enough about.
I agree. Very well said, especially social media, such a great topic you bring up. It's become a platform where people can really broadcast their successes and hide their failures. And so for those who have the successes at times because of great luck, I always say, hard work and being extremely bright and smart and talented is part of the job. It's the right time, right place, and knowing the right people, having the right luck is so critical for those big successes. And for those people who have that, and really broadcasting it on social media can place a lot of people who unfortunately have not had the same chances and extremely disadvantaged. And so be able to deal with that kind of mentality and watch, looking at everyone on social media, how happy they look. And I can tell you, most people who look so happy on social media are successful. They have many skeletons in their closet.
Absolutely.
It's just not, visible to other people. And so remember that and don't feel disappointed or undermined. There's one element that I want to inject here that is also really important, Chad, is when a failure occurs, that initial shock can be extremely disturbing.
Yep.
And how do you dig yourself out of that? Especially the first couple of months can be extremely painful. When you have that sort of a depressive symptom that you can't enjoy anything,
yep.
You feel like a failure, you have betrayed your family, you have betrayed everyone around you. What about if we had done this and this would have succeeded, we would have been able to do that.
Yep.
And now we're not able to do that. And just every day you triple, quadruple question every move you made and be able to dig yourself out of that.
Yep.
And be able to move forward and don't get paralyzed, which is the definition of resilience, is so extremely critical. That initial dig out.
Yep.
I would say that's the most vulnerable, critical aspect of resilience and be able to deal with failure.
100%, and that's, it's my mama, my father's mother. She was an old Southern woman who was tough as nails and had, that resilience and grit that we've been talking about so much. And when I was a younger man, she always used to tell me, you don't stop fighting. If you're in a boxing match with a gorilla, you don't stop when you're tired. You stop when the gorilla's tired.
Right.
And being able to get up off the mat after you've suffered a setback, that is the key part. When I'm sure, especially we're rapidly approaching residency interview season for everybody that's getting ready to graduate with their MD. And I've heard other surgeons say this, and I believe I've heard you say this before too. Success is great, and all publications and all those things that make somebody a great candidate to join a program are wonderful. But how do you deal with failure? That's really gives you so much more insight into the kind of what people are made of and what their ability to get through something as hard of a training program as 7 years of neurosurgery residency.
Yeah. I agree. As just like Tom Brady mentioned in that piece, is all about our failures who define us, not our successes. And I think failures often, at least for me, seem to occur when you're the most tired, you're exhausted in surgery. It's those last 2 hours where you're manipulating a critical structure. And when you're really, if you're, in life, how this applies, when you're really in a project, you're dealing with a very important undertaking, and it's just those last few months of the project coming to fruition when you suddenly see yourself at risk of highest failure. And how can you become more productive, make amazing decisions when you're most tired and compromised? Those abilities are the most valuable in terms of avoiding failure and predicting failure and dealing with it. So being able to recognize impending failure and avoid it obviously has an extreme amount of value than dealing with the failure. If that is within our control, many times failures are unfortunately not in our control, but to have that ability, the insight to recognize it when you're most compromised, distracted, and avoid the risk of a decision that could lead to a magnificently unusual and unfortunate failure. To be able to do that, obviously, is an extremely important gift that one has to be always able to recognize.
Absolutely. Yeah, and of course we don't want to be all doom and gloom about resilience and grit. We've touched on themes of how to recover from failure in this episode, and you shared your own experience with that early tough case with going back for that last 5%, it being tough. But the thing that we want our listeners to really kind of have as a takeaway is that it's always darkest before the dawn.
Yes.
We're able to, we want you to be able to map out those weak points to be able to work on them, but don't forget to celebrate your wins. We see, especially it applies across all disciplines, all fields, those many sleepless nights, those many, hours spent with sort of horse blinders on, where we're constantly worried about, if everything is going to kind of come unraveled. And, make sure that if you are keeping something like a feedback journal for yourself, you're also keeping a very clear column for those wins, because that is what keeps you going. The ability to get off the mat is great, but make sure you don't lose focus of the things that you have achieved and succeeded with, because that's what, all of this is about, whether it's for your family, for your colleagues, for your friends, but ultimately for yourself. You're the one that has to sleep with yourself when you go to bed at night. Make sure you remember and document those wins and be reminded of them.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah. Share the good times and the bad times.
Absolutely.
With your family. And I think having the right spouse, right wife, partner is so critical in life. I would say that's the biggest decision one makes. And so having that companion who can really help you in these difficult times to dig yourself out and use the energy instead of blaming to productive maneuvers and actions to be able to move forward are absolutely so critical. Don't dwell on the failure. Learn from it. Regret it. Don't use blame. use every ounce of energy you have to make good decisions under mentorship, because right after the shock of a failure, you could be almost compromised to the point that you cannot make good decisions. And during those vulnerable 2 months or more, having the right person to guide you, to be there for you, and to reinforce your positive attributes, to take you through these storm and take you to the other side of the shore, it cannot be underestimated.
100%, 100%. Yeah, your person is tantamount to how you're able to succeed in this life. That is a point that should go without saying, but we will say it here regardless. If you're a professional that has, any kind of struggle going on in your life right now, and you've got somebody at home that you're fortunate enough to have care about you, make sure you're leaning on them, because we often find that they are some of the best sounding boards. They're the person who has the navigator's co-seat as you go through these things. That's the person you should lean on the most. Absolutely. Wow.
Thank you.
Perfect. So those are excellent takeaways. So, just to kind of recap for our listeners, in terms of if you feel like you don't have resilience or grit the way that you want to, you can build it. So you can do things like keeping a feedback journal, seek feedback from your mentors and everybody in your life that you trust. They can help you kind of pull those blinders off and see, the areas that you can improve, things that you can control, and acknowledge the things that you can't. And ultimately, we want you to celebrate your own resilience. Being able to recognize where you're getting those wins after a tough failure is key to being able to provide the energy to continue to move down the road and reach your goals in life.
I agree. Very well said. A great summary. And, in these tough times of failure, one can say, well, other people have resilience. I just don't have it. I don't think anybody's born with resilience. I think it's an acquired talent and ability, and all of us have to work on it. I mean, there could be failures that are so challenging that one cannot deal with it on his or her own, and then it would be important to have psychotherapy, counseling, mentorship to build that. That's very important. So I would not look at the fact that, well, different people have different resilience levels. I think at some point that is true, but in general, resilience is an acquired talent.
Absolutely.
People may need help to build it and should not shy from getting help as needed.
Yeah. Again, I know I've used a couple tropes throughout the episode, but again, another one that comes to mind: the hardest steel is forged in the hottest fire.
Yes.
100%. The more you are willing to expose yourself to those situations, the tougher and more grit you begin to develop. And that's, I think should absolutely be stated often. And it's something we have to tell ourselves.
Right. Yeah, it sounds obvious. And it's the difference between hearing and listening. We hear a lot of
100%.
things, but we may not listen to them at all.
Yep.
So be able to know that grit, resilience, all of that are acquired. People need help to get it, and seek help as needed.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cohen, for talking with us today about what we're going to call this episode is the art of failure. My name is Chad Smith. I've been your co-host for today. We appreciate you joining us for the Atlas and Axis podcast. And with me, as always, is our illustrious host, Dr. Aaron Cohen-Gadol. Don't forget, if you have any questions about a neurosurgical condition, you can go to www.aaron, Cohen, COHEN-GADOL.com. That's aaroncohengadol.com for any questions you may have about various neurosurgical conditions, brain tumors, aneurysms, things of that nature. We're always happy to respond. And if you have any questions about a difficult neurosurgical case, you can email Dr. Cohen at info@nsatlas.com. And again, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Chad. Very honored to work with you.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Take care.